I'll do it anyway. It's really good to be with you men this morning, and I'm very humbled to be here, especially after I found out the other two speakers that you've had and how qualified they are in the past 2 years. And many of you have mentioned the television program. I tell people on the program, it's not about me. I'm just a bag of dirt that God's using. And that's all of us are. And I used to hold a lot of meetings in Natchez, Mississippi, when my friend James Moore was the preacher there. And he delighted in introducing me as a simple preacher. And I didn't take offense at it, because I believe in simplicity. And I was taught that in school. It's good to see Paul here. He may have had Brother Benson, or not Benson, Banson. You had to know how to pronounce his name or he would get you. Brother Banson said in class one day, don't calculate your juvenile poultry until the proper period of incubation has materialized. He said, just tell it like it is. Don't count your chickens till they hatch. And that stuck with me. So I believe in just say what you mean, be kind with it and loving with it as you possibly can, but just be very simple. And so if you came expecting something complicated, you're going to be disappointed, because I'm going to have a very simple presentations for you today. But I think things that they help me in studying for them and hopefully will be beneficial to all of us as leaders. Being a leader in the Lord's church is an awesome thing, awesome responsibility. And I don't think any of us take it lightly, or you wouldn't be here today if you took it lightly. And so what I want to talk about today in this first session, the second session, third, and the fourth, are things that are just practical for us that I hope will make us better leaders. I'd encourage you to take some notes so that you can go back home and maybe share this with some other leaders or even the church. If you take your Bibles, turn to Nehemiah 2:17 and 18. I started to school at Old Alabama Christian College in 1962, and I sat at the feet of Dr. Rex Turner Sr. for 4 years. He finally learned my name at the end of the 4th year, and he never called me my first name. I was just Lambert. And but he insisted that we use the American Standard of 1901. That was his translation of choice, and there weren't many other choices in those days, unless you used the RSV or the King James. But you see, I bought a King James before I went off to school. I paid $12.95 for it at a bookstore in downtown Pritchard, Alabama. And I didn't have enough money to go buy another one, so that's what I started using. And it stuck. Now, in my teaching classes, Summerdale has an young adult minister. Not many congregations have one in our area, but Summerdale has one. I'm the young adult minister. I'll never forget the Sunday I announced that, you know. I said, guess what? We have a young adult minister, and guess who it is? And then I pointed to myself, and these young adults, they just brightened up. So I teach their class, and in that class I don't use the King James. I use the New King James, which is now that I've gotten older, is my translation of choice, but I use the ESV. I use a lot of different ones. And so I'm going to be reading out of the King James today, but I want you to know I'm not, as one old fella came to Summerdale one day, and the first words out of his mouth, now you've got to know I'm a King James man. And I knew he was trouble right off the bat. So So every once in a while, I'd quote out of the American Standard, I'd quote out of the NIV, and all kinds of other translations just to irritate him. I'm sorry to say that. Now, let's look at Nehemiah, and we're going to be studying, first of all, out of the book of Nehemiah. When I got to thinking about a leader, a real leader, well, there are a lot of characters in the Bible that are good leaders, but to me, Nehemiah stands really tall. And I want to read verses 17 and 18, and I really prefer that one of the men come up and read, but you'll need to come up to the mic so that you can be heard. And Paul, would you mind doing that? Come up and read for us Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 17 and 18. And this will serve as the beginning point of what we're going to be talking about this morning.
Then I said to them, "You see the bad situation we are in, that Jerusalem is desolate and its gates burned by fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem so that we will no longer be a reproach." I told them how the hand of my God had been favorable to me, and also about the king's words which he had spoken to me. Then they said, "Let us arise and build." So they put their hands to the good work.
The part of that last passage that I'm looking at is, "Let us rise up and build." So let's talk about that day. Now, you're going to have to be patient with me till I learn how to use a computer over here. I'm just a preacher. I'm not a computer guru. Somewhere around 445 BC is when the Jews started coming back out of captivity. And when they came back, here's what they found. They found the city was in ruins. They found that the wall was broken down. They were in disrepair. And Nehemiah was the one that was to lead the people in reconstruction of those walls. Now, when I think about a leader, I think about Nehemiah. I think he was a great leader. And it was Harry Truman that made this statement. He said, now, in giving his definition of a leader, he said, "A leader is a man who can get you to do what you don't want to do and make you like doing it." I don't know whether that's the best definition of leadership that you can find. Well, someone was mentioning to Teddy Roosevelt about him being a great leader, and this is what he said. He said, "No, I'm simply an ordinary man, highly motivated." And I think in the church that's what we deal with. We're dealing with just ordinary people, and when they become leaders, they're highly motivated to do that work. But I think Nehemiah is one of the most significant leaders of all time. So what we want to do is study some things out of the book of Nehemiah, principles that I think made him a good leader and will help us as leaders to help build the church today. And I think that's what we're all concerned about. We are at Summerdale. That's what we're about, is trying to build the church. And I know every congregation and the leadership of those congregations are the same. Now, the first thing I want to notice from chapter 1 and verse 4, that Nehemiah was a leader from the heart out. Now, what I mean by that is when he saw the condition of the walls, we're told in verse 4 that he wept. That he wept over that. And that tells you an awful lot about Nehemiah. I believe it does. And when all great men and women of God have been people who had hearts that were compassionate hearts, and that would. There's something wrong with us, I think, when we cannot weep over the things that are going on in our world today, for example. I think about Jeremiah, and Jeremiah's man was a man with a broken heart. When he saw the state of God's people, he said, "Oh, that my head were waters, and mine eyes a fountain of tears, that I might weep day and night for the slain of the daughter of my people." And so he had a broken heart. Then I think about Jesus. I got to thinking one day, if I could find one word that would really describe the ministry of Jesus, what would that one word be? And I've tried this in classes, and they come up with love, and well, I agree with that. That's great, right? But I believe the one word that described the ministry of Christ was the word compassion. The compassionate Christ. Matthew 9 tells us that he was moved with compassion when he saw the people wandering about as sheep without a shepherd. And I think it's strange when there's so few tears that are being shed today, when there's so much for us to weep about. And I read about Thomas Carlyle's wife, and that I don't think from what I have read that he was the model husband. And it is said that his wife died of a broken heart. She had a caretaker who would come into her room, and she would try to console Miss Carlyle. And the woman who was her caretaker would actually weep. And she would hug Miss Carlyle, trying to comfort her. And Carlyle's wife said, "Her tears consoled me." I don't know that a person will ever be a good leader unless we have hearts that are compassionate hearts. The idea that we can be hard-boiled is just far under what the Bible teaches about leadership. Let's look at another quality of him. He was a leader from the knees up. Verse 4, he prayed. One of our elders died back in December. He was 67 years old. I'm 76, so I thought he was a young man. And one of the last things he told me on a Saturday night before he died, about 1 o'clock on Sunday morning on the Lord's Day, we talked about the church, some things that we needed to do in the church. Things are on his heart. He said, "You know, Billy, as elders, we need to pray more." Well, I couldn't disagree with that. He said, we need to pray more as a group, as elders. There are only three of us. There were four of us then, only three now. And I have to agree with him. And he being dead yet speaks, see, to me. I don't think you'll ever accomplish much without prayer. You never will. Several years ago, I was down in Florida in a meeting, and I think the year was 1975. I'll not tell the town unless some of you have relatives there. and anyway, it was a lackluster meeting. I mean, there was nothing exciting going on in that meeting, and I don't know, I just had a sense there was something that was not right. I just had that sense. And those of you who have preached for any long length of time can, and even those who are elders, you can sense when there's something that's not quite up to par. And about the only thing that was exciting was Brother Charlie McClendon, black preacher from Northside, came over on Sunday night with about 50 or 60 of his brethren, and they livened things up for me. On Friday night, I was going to get in my car and drive back to Mobile. That's where I lived at the time. And the elders invited me to come to the office. Well, it was more than an invitation. And they locked the door. I was a lot younger, and I wondered, what did I say that upset the elders? That was my first thought, you know. And they stood in front of me in a semicircle. And they said, "Brother Lambert, what's wrong here?" I was a visitor. How was I to know what was wrong? And they asked, "What can we do to help this church grow?" I said, well, as they caught me so off guard, I didn't have time to really think, and this was my reaction. I said, "The only thing I can tell you is you're going to have to go to work." They said, "That's what the last preacher we asked said." They said, Brother Lambert, before you leave to go home, we want to pray together. And they literally got down on their knees in that office, and that was before the day of my artificial knees when I could get down like that safely. And we all got down on our knees in the middle of that office. And those elders prayed. They prayed so fervently for that church that it almost made chills come all over me. I think the angels stopped in flight to listen to them prayers. And when I left to go home, this is exactly what I thought. This was the most successful meeting I've ever been in my life. I left that eldership on their knees praying to God for help. That's how we lead. That's the kind of a leader Nehemiah was. He was leading from the knees up. That is, he was a man of prayer. It is said that Charles Spurgeon, and of course Charles Spurgeon in his day was a very renowned Baptist preacher. He preached in a tabernacle that had no heating and cooling in it, and he did not have instrumental music in it. And someone came there one day, and it must have been one of those cold mornings in England, and they said, Mr. Spurgeon, where's your heating plant? And he said, come and I'll show you. And he took them downstairs in the building, and he opened up a door into a room, and there were 400 men in that room praying for that service that day. He said, now that, friends, is my heating plant. That'll warm up any pulpit, won't it? They were praying, and I think most of the failures that we experience in life are going to be prayer failures. James 4:2 speaks of I think a needless state of poverty. You have not, why not? Because you ask not. I believe that there are blessings and favors that God bestows upon us only if we ask. Only if we ask. On one of the television broadcasts, I was talking about prayer one day, and I said, wouldn't it be a wonderful thing if all of the churches of Christ all over the United States would come together on a given day, and all we were going to do that day was pray for this country? Wonder what would happen. Well, this woman called. She said, I think you're the one to do it. I said, well, I tell you what we did do. I called Dr. Mike Williams, who's the president of Fulton University, and I suggested that we have a day of prayer in the state of Alabama, and we have it at Fulton University on the very day that he was to be inaugurated as our president. And we did. And we had the gym filled with people for that prayer service. Other churches could not come. They had them at their own buildings. And I preached that miracles have ceased, but I think I almost saw one that day. We were going to let it last for 1 hour. There were 20 preachers on the front pew, on the front seat. We didn't have pews in the gym. And they were given a particular topic to pray over. Some prayed about race relations. Some prayed about poverty. Some prayed about war. Some prayed about the family. Some different topics. We had 20 different topics. And do you know all of them finished on time? I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that 20 preachers could pray and finish on time. But now I've been asked, let's do it again. Let's do it again. We got to be leaders from the knees up. But he also surveyed what was going on. He saw the situation and he planned a strategy. If you'll notice 2:15, he went and he looked at the walls. King James says he viewed the walls. And you've got to know what's going on if you're see what you're in to be able to do anything. Now, Nehemiah could see the need, and he knew what to do about it. I think a lot of us are kind of like this pilot that came in over the speaker system in the plane, and he said, ladies and gentlemen, I have good news and bad news. The bad news is we're off course. I have absolutely no idea where we are. But the good news is we're making excellent time. Sometimes I think that we're making excellent time. We don't know where we're headed. Nehemiah could see what needed to be done. There's a passage in 1 Chronicles 12:32 that has a good message in it, that talking about the sons of Issachar, that they had an understanding of the times, that they may not know what Israel ought to do. You see, I think as leaders, we've got to have an understanding of the times, so we'll know what to do. Think about the time that we live in. We live in a time of global instant communication. It absolutely blows my mind to think about the fact that I can get my telephone back here, and I can get on that telephone and I can text someone down in Alabama and they'll get it instantly. Not only that, if I had the right number or the right person, I could text them in China, do the same thing, instant global communication. But we've not, you and I have not, some of us at least, have not always lived in that kind of a situation. But that's the kind of a day that we live in. And we live in a time of speed and travel. I've read some of the lives of some of the pioneer preachers, and they'd go by horseback, and they may be gone for 6 months. I think that's the case with T.B. Lambert, and it would take them weeks to get to one of their preaching appointments. And I left Alabama to drive over to Pensacola, Florida, to get on the plane, to fly to Atlanta and then into Flint. And just it was just a few hours. It's amazing the day in which we live. We live in a time of multiple options. Do you have Baskin-Robbins here? The ice cream Baskin-Robbins? I've not been in there. It's dangerous for me to go in there. It's almost as dangerous as it is for some people to go to Lane Bryant because they get cheesecake there. Now, that's a joke that only your youth minister back here will understand. And but they have 31 flavors of ice cream. How do you decide what flavor of ice cream to get? Now Louise, that's my wife's name, and there's a frozen yogurt shop we have at home. We love to go there, and it's almost as confusing because all of the different flavors they have. I remember when Dad came home from the war, World War II, I was just a small boy. When he got back home, he had to buy a car. Guess what color of that car was? Anybody want to guess? Black. You know why? They were all black. There were not any options. Think about going to buy a car today. I went to get my wife one recently, and we found one, and she liked it. She said, I like that one. I said, well, I like it, and I like the price, especially $10,000 off, you know. And I'll have to tell you this. I hate to say this, but I'll just tell you anyway. I told the guy, I said, look, I've got a car at the house. Let me go get it because I want to trade it in on this one. I thought they got it marked down $10,000. If I trade it in, hey, it's going to be less than that. We get back to the house. I said, Louise, this car's gone. Somebody has taken our car. And I called some of the relatives around to see if they knew where it was. Nobody knew where it was. And I said, I called the police station. I reported it stolen. And I go back down to the place where I was buying the car, and I said, I hate to tell you guys this, but I said, I don't have anything to trade in. They say, why not? I said, somebody's taken it. Well, I was going to drive up the street just a little ways there in Foley to go get the check to come back to pay for it, and we passed by this Express Oil, and Louise said, there's our car. We'd taken it up there that morning to have the oil changed. Oh my. But you see, when you buy a car today, you have all kinds of options. I don't think I have to tell you that we live in a time of changing values. I was in a meeting last week in Mississippi, and in the Bible class on Sunday morning, I talked about truth and the way that a lot of people perceive truth today. And because of they see truth, what is truth to them may not be truth to us, because they look through the prism of relativity and a lot of other different philosophical ideas. But values have changed so much in our country. And so that's the kind of a time we live in. And with all of that in mind, I believe that the church, when we think about the day that we live in, we have to have a plan in place that will help confront the world that we live in. Several years ago, I was reading a book by a preacher. He was a missionary for as I recall, maybe the Church of God. He was in South America. He came back to the States to make some reports, maybe to his sporting churches, I don't know, about like we do at times. And he went to Chicago to make a report. So they picked him up at the airport. And as they were riding across town, he said to the preacher, "What strategy do you have in place to reach this city for Christ?" He said, "Well, we have you coming this week to speak." He said, No, you didn't understand. That might be a part of what you plan, but what is your overall strategy that you have to take Chicago to Christ? And there was none. And he asked, what commander would take an army into battle without a battle strategy? We are an army. We're at war. We're at war with not ourselves. We're at war with Satan. There ought to be some kind of strategy to help to reach our world today. Now, I told you that I'm pretty simple. And so I believe there's some things that it's just my analysis at least. And you can have your own analysis. But I think there are at least three things I want to suggest that our world needs today. Number one is hope. Hope. I read about this submarine that was disabled down at the bottom of the ocean, and they sent divers down, and this allegedly actually happened just off the coast of Nova Scotia. I'm not sure what year. But when the divers got near the sub, they could hear some tapping going on from inside the sub. So they assumed that there was still someone alive and that they were tapping on the side of the sub, and one of the divers could detect that tapping was in Morse code. And they were tapping, "Is there any hope? Is there any hope?" That's a question I think a lot of people in our world are asking. I think about a mother raising her children by herself, living in the depths of poverty in some inner city, who wants better for her children. And she's asking, is there any hope? Or I think about a young person who came from a good family, but without intending to do so, they got caught up in the drug culture. And it happens to our own within the church sometimes. And deep down inside, they want out. They want to change. But you know, pride keeps you from going to the preacher sometimes, and pride will certainly keep you from going to mother and daddy and saying, I wish you would help me. But there are a lot of teenagers that are asking secretly, privately, in their own minds, in their own hearts, is there any hope? You think about a man who just lost his job. He's got several children. He comes home from work for the last day. And he says to his wife, I got laid off today. And this is a family that lives not from month to month, not from week to week, day to day. And their question is the same, is there any hope? I think that the world today is looking for hope. It's not just older people, it's young, it doesn't know an age where that stops. All people want hope. And that's where we come in with Him who is the hope of the world. But I think also that means that we've got to do what the second word I have up there suggests. People are looking for community. They're looking for community. Many of you know about Getting to Know Your Bible, the television program, and possibly maybe this afternoon I may try to give you a little update on that, because we're not on the same station we used to be on. But now we produce the program in Chicago. I just got back from there about 2 weeks ago. And there is a group in consort with the group in Chicago. There's a group in Little Rock, Arkansas that helps us with social media. And I said, we want to try to appeal to the millennial generation. I said, I don't think that as an older preacher that I can do that on television. So we'd like to do it through social media. And I know absolutely nothing about it. I can dial a number on my phone. Now that's just about the extent of my knowledge. Well, maybe not. I might be exaggerating just a little. Not much though. So this group helps us, and they write articles that are designed to appeal to the millennial generation. They have teasers on the social media, and they write these articles, and they wanted some resources, and so just off the top of my head I said, well, House to House, Heart to Heart, I know them. Alan Webster's the author of that. Gospel Advocate, I've been knowing that since I was a baby. And Apologetics Press, that's based in Montgomery. I said, use those three sources. I had some others, but I said, I was just trying to see how they would do. Well, they wrote some articles, and then they'll send them to me, and I have to sit down and edit those articles. And one of the writers, about 5 writers, and one of them knows absolutely nothing about the Bible detail, because I have to almost rewrite those articles. But the young woman who oversees it is a member of the church from Little Rock, Arkansas, goes to the Pleasant Valley Church. She's a graduate of Harding University. And she's a delight to work with. We'll get her on the computer, and we'll sit there and talk together. And we can see all of the group, and she can see us. And one of the words that appears all the time is this word community. That's sort of the millennial generation has certain words, and that's one of them, community. Well, I got to wondering about that, and so I did a little looking around, on the computer. Let me ask first of all, how many of you have had, and this is not a positive thing, have you ever had any millennials that left your congregation? Anybody? See hand. I've seen that happen so many times. Let me read you some things about the millennial generation and what they're looking for, what they tell us they're looking for. 2 in 10 Americans under 30 believe attending a church is important or worthwhile. 59% of millennials raised in a church have dropped out. 35% of millennials have an anti-church stance, believing the church does more harm than good. And millennials are the least likely age group of anyone to attend church. And then I found this information: 7 out of 10 who drop out did not have meaningful relationships in the church. Did you hear that? Meaningful relationship. When I read that, I thought about a time that I was in a meeting with Dr. Flavel Yakeley, who's a social scientist who did a lot of study about the growth of the Church of Christ in the United States. And he said that unless a person forms meaningful relationships in the church, at least I think he said, I forget how many, but he had a figure, they will drop out within 5 years. They've got to have community. That's what the millennials are talking about. And then they're explaining the secret to keeping them, and it says it's not because you don't have contemporary worship, and it's not because young singles want to go around just want to be around young singles, and it's not because they're uninterested in the church. They say that it's often the church is just not single friendly. And here's the secret to keeping millennials in your church. They said, this is them speaking to us, make room for us. Make room for us. And they want community. I've seen this at Summerdale. We have lost some millennials. I went to Freed Hardeman lectures, and I heard, for example, Roy Johnson, who is with Lads to Leaders program. And I forget how many he said we are losing constantly. But they are leaving, and I talked to Phil Sanders, who is with In Search of the Lord's Way, speaker on that program. They're leaving the church in droves. I think we can turn it around with them, but we've got to make them feel at home in the church. You say, well, how do you go about doing that? One of the things we're doing, we're starting with our teenagers before they become the millennial generation. And I hope that Carrie's son Seth will help us with this summer. I think he can be a tremendous impact with that. One of our elders teaches the teenagers right now, and they love him. And he's encouraged them to write letters or notes, just a little note to people in the church. He's starting with the older people. And they write notes to these older people, and guess what a widow, how she feels when she gets a note from a teenager. Excited. Now, he's encouraging them to go a step beyond, and this is where Seth's going to help us this summer. He wants these teenagers who have written notes to these widows to go sit with them and worship. Go sit with them and worship. And beyond that, I think he's wanting them eventually to take them out to lunch. What are they doing? What are they doing? Forming relationships. When those teenagers are in the so-called millennial age group, they're going to already have relationships in the church. I think there's a way to go about it positively to develop that and maybe to turn the tide. But I think community, all of us want community. For example, a lot of people feel left out in the church. I've often said there's a loneliness of space and loneliness of a crowd. A lot of people feel lonely and left out because they are separated from people that they love. Children that go off to college for the first time, they get lonely. The first 2 weeks are terrible for them, and the schools have to really work to keep them there that first 2 weeks until they get over missing mama. Loneliness. That's loneliness of space. Maybe you have a son or a daughter in the military and they get deployed. And there's that certain loneliness of space. You're lonely to see them. And then lonely in a crowd. You can go to a busy mall and see the people hurrying about, especially in the holiday season. And there are a lot of lonely people. There are a lot of people there because they want to be around other people. They're lonely. And you can be lonely in a church service. And we ought to spot those people and make them and pull them in and make them feel happy and welcome and warm to be there. I think the most important part of it is when they first walk in the door. They first walk in the door. And I'm sure some of you are good at that, and some of us may need to make some improvements along those lines. But here's a third thing our world needs. It just needs for us to do what Jesus would do. And let's turn over to Luke chapter 4. And I want us to look at verses 16 to 19. I need another reader for that this morning. And I'm going to ask our Daniel to come up and read that for us. Yes. If you don't mind, Daniel, Luke 4, verse 16 to 19. If Jesus was in the world today, what would his business be?
Great. And he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and as was his custom, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and he stood up to read. And the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him, and he unrolled the scroll and found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim the good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives, and recovering the sight of the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor."
Thank you. To put it in a nutshell, Jesus came into this world to help whom? People. I have a sermon that I preached some time ago, and it's based on a statement, he looking up to heaven, he sighed, and it's about showing Jesus compassion and so on. And if Jesus came back into the world, where would you find him? Would you find him at home, just sitting in front of the television? I think if Jesus came back into the world today, you'd find him where he was in his time. He'd in the marketplace. He was out in the streets. He was where people are. Where people are. And if he came back, what kind of people would he associate himself with? I did a little study of the different appearances of Jesus to people. Now, I think I came up with about 60, if I recall. That could be off some. Very few of those appearances that Jesus had were with people that we would call the elite. Most of the time, Jesus met with people who were somewhat the outcast of society. So if he came back today, where do you think Jesus would go? I think he would go then and now where he went then. And I think that's what we've got to do today. We've got to be Christ in the world today. We are to be a reflection of his life and his ministry in the world today. Well, let's look at another of the suggestions that we have of leadership. As elders and as leaders in the church, have you ever had opposition for what you wanted to do? Maybe not the whole church being opposed, but somebody come around and say, well, I know that's what you guys want to do, but I'll tell you how I really feel about it. I'm going to tell you how I feel about it. Nehemiah had opposition, but he refused to let opposition stop him. For example, they mocked him. Chapter 2 and verse 19, actually, I'd call it they were laughing at him for wanting to build a wall. Then in chapter 3 and verse 5, the nobles refused to help with the work. They now put their neck, or the New King James says their shoulder, to the work of the Lord. I don't know whether they didn't want to get dirt under their fingernails or mortar on their hands or what the problem was, but they just didn't want help. And then they were accused of being weak. Chapter 4 and verse 2 says, what do these feeble Jews, what do these feeble, weak people think they're trying to do? And then there was this conspiracy in verses 7 and 8 of chapter 4. There were those that were going to conspire to help stop the building of the walls. And then he was offered a compromise. They came, they said, let's talk about this thing. Let's have a little talk. They said, let's come down to the plain of oh no. And he said, oh no, I'm doing a great work and I cannot come down. They tried to get him to stop the work, and then he was misrepresented. They accused him of really building the wall, trying to rebuild the walls so that the people could make him the king. And so he didn't let all of this opposition stop him. And there's something that's never been built from the beginning of time. And I try to think about this as a leader, as a preacher, as chairman of the board at Faulkner. There's never been a statue built from the very beginning of time to a critic. Never been one built. They build statues to people to get the job done. Now, we don't want statues. And I've often said in this, I've said this in sermons, so I guess it's okay to say it here. Nobody will ever get ahead of you so long as they're behind you, kicking you in the seat of the pants. They'll never get ahead of you. Refuse to let, if you know you're right, this is the way I was taught. I was mentored by an older preacher. And he called me Bill, not Billy. He said, Bill, when you know what is right, you do not let any opposition stop you. Know what's right, first of all. And so he refused to let opposition stop him. And I don't mean that we're ugly with people. That's not my nature. If all people knew what a kind, loving guy I really was, they'd all love me. But all people don't. But we're going to have opposition in what we do. Now, when I was a young preacher, I made a lot of mistakes along that line. I was preaching in a little church as soon as I got out of school, and they needed some classrooms and badly. And so we made arrangements to borrow money enough at the bank to pay for them, and I promised the banker, he made me promise that I would stay with the church until it was paid, and he never did forgive me for leaving before they paid for it, but they did finish paying for it after I left. But we had one man that didn't want us to build those rooms. He opposed it, and I didn't approach it quite right. I'm going to tell you the wrong way to do it now, okay? So, being young and inexperienced and lacking wisdom, I said, you better not stand in the way, because if you do, you might get run over. And it was about 6 months before he and I had a decent conversation. But I still love, that's not the right way to go about it. That's the wrong way to do it. Love your opposition and be so good to them and so kind to them that you make friends out of your enemies. Now, he knew how to organize the people to get the job done. And I want you to take your Bible and let's look at the 3rd chapter. And we're going to be talking about this in another session today about organization. But I don't want to read all the verses. I'm just going to pick out one, anywhere in, I could almost close my eyes and point to one. All right, 12. And next to him repaired. All right. And then look at 12, that's 12. And look at 11. Malchijah, the son of Haram, and Hashab, the son of Pethath Moab, repaired the other piece in the tower of the furnaces. Verse 10, next unto them repaired Jediah, next unto them repaired Rephaim, next to him. What Nehemiah did, he organized the work. Everyone had a certain section of that wall to rebuild. You start here and you go to this point. You start here and you go to that point. And chapter 4 and verse 6 talks about the attitude the people had about that. And what does chapter 4 and verse 6, in the latter part of that verse, it tells us about the attitude of the people. This is why they rebuilt those walls in how many days? 52 days. An amazing thing. I've been in some cities, going through Birmingham, Alabama. The state has been working on the highway there for, I know, 20 years. They had never rebuilt the walls around Jerusalem. 52 days. And chapter 4 and verse 6 tells us what was the attitude the people had. They had a mind to work. A mind to work. And he used everyone, and he used their talents and whatever abilities they had to get the job done. And it goes without saying that we are to work. Jesus had a work to do. I think in John 9:4, he said, I must work the works of him that sent me. And that was not physical labor, but the work of redemption, of the coming to be the Redeemer of the world. But we are to work out our own salvation, Philippians 2:12, and the other passages we have there that you can write down. But we want the church where we are to be first of all, what God wants, not what the preacher wants. The preachers have a lot of wants, and elders have a lot of wants. And we have them at Summerdale, a lot of desires. But my prayer is that God just help us to be what you want us to be. Your church on earth, your people on the body of your Son on this earth. And I believe that a working church, a church that is involved, is going to be a happy church. It will be happy. I remember going to a church one time. I felt like I was, first of all, I felt like I was in a funeral parlor. The lights were down low. The day down low. Everyone seemed so sad. Just depressed almost, you know. And there was no obvious reason. There had not been any tragedy in the church. So my objective that week, I had one, I'm sorry, this is built into me. I had an objective that week. You know what it was? To get them to smile. If I could just get them to smile that week. It took me from Sunday to Wednesday night to get a grin out of them. I'm telling you, those people were not happy people. They were not a happy bunch of people. But I believe that when a church is a working church, you're going to have members that are happy people. And secondly, going to be friendly. A working church is a friendly church. I've been to places, and it was not very far from here. Years and years ago. I'm talking about in Michigan. I'm talking about, and I won't say how far away here, but not far from here. It was 3 days before some of them in that congregation would even speak to me. I don't know why they had me come preach. I think they were sizing me up to see whether I was conservative or liberal or a nut or something. I don't know what they were trying to figure out about me. But finally they did speak to me. They were not friendly at all. And if they were not friendly to me, what do you think about somebody coming in off the street that's looking for the Lord? that's looking for hope, that's looking for salvation, that would be a turnoff. We got to be friendly people. And I don't mean fake friendly. You know what I mean? There's a fake friendly. You can grin and smile, how you doing, how you doing, and that's all you mean by it. But I mean a genuine, there's a genuine love that we ought to have for people. Be a friendly people. I believe that a working church is trouble-free. I read this statement one time in a preacher's sermon. It was a little sermon book, and it was really old. It was so old, Carrie, that the pages were actually falling apart in it, but it had this statement. I hope I can remember it correctly. It's about a mule. A pulling mule can't kick while pulling. And a kicking mule can't pull while kicking. If we're working, we don't have time to kick. Trouble-free. And then a working church is filled with enthusiasm and zeal. So zealous, on fire. I don't care what you call it. You can call it faith, you can call it drive, you can call it zeal, you can call it enthusiasm. Whatever you want to call it, we need it, don't we? We need to be on fire for the Lord. And we need to be zealous. And when we are a working church, we are a zealous church. And I'm sure you heard about the guy that went down to see this church building caught on fire, and there was a guy in the community was an atheist, and he went down there, and the church was burning to the ground, and one of the members walks over to him and said, I don't think I've ever seen you come to church before. He said, it's the first time I've ever seen this church on fire. If we get on fire, I was told as a young preacher, Bill, if you'll get on fire, well, I was first told you either need to put more fire in your sermons or put your sermons in the fire. And he said, if you'll get on fire with your subject, people will come to watch you burn. We need to be a zealous, when we're working, we're going to be filled with zeal and enthusiasm, not fake. And then that's when we're going to be a growing church. There's just not a shortcut. I've never found one. Well, then let's look at another thing about Nehemiah, and you'll have to give me time signal when I'm almost through with this lesson. I think he knew how to motivate people. I think he knew how to motivate them to work. Look at 2:17, and in Nehemiah chapter 2 and 17, and he said, see the distress we're in. Now I like to put it in Southern. Look what a mess we're in, fellas. We're in a bad way here, guys. And he said, the city is in waste, the gates are burned with fire. He said, let us do what? Rise up and build. That motivates you. I think of a coach back in the locker room, at halftime, and the guys have been lagging a little bit. He's not going there and say, well, you've been doing fine, fellas. Let's just keep rocking along just like you're doing. That's not exactly the way that it does, And he said, let's go in there. Let's get in there. We've got to fire up. We've got to do our best. Let's rise up and win this game. And that's what he did. He showed them the need. He had a plan of action, and he knew how to bring out the very best. But then here's another point. He knew what was most important. He knew what his priorities were. When they said, why don't you come down and let's talk about this, he said, I'm doing a great work. Guys, we're doing a great work for the Lord. Wherever you're from, you're doing a great work for the Lord. And we cannot come down. He didn't want to get bogged down in trivia. Recently, and I'm making a confession this morning about the eldership at Summerdale. Recently, I was in a meeting with the elders, and they had said that our insurance carrier notified us that it's almost time for renewal. Well, we have a pretty good sized plant, and it's a pretty good sized premium every year. And they said, to which I agreed that we might need to have someone else to